What's up, everybody? It is Izzy, back again with another episode of the Q&A. I got a little bit lazy about uploading these to YouTube, so we're getting 2 uploads in one day here. That said, if you guys like the Q&A, go hit the like button or leave a comment for the algorithm. Do it. How should you train differently when you are on a cut? You should not train differently just because you're in a caloric deficit. In fact, the vast majority of people won't even get weaker in a caloric deficit if they're using the correct volume. So if you are getting very deep into a cut or you're getting very, very lean and you notice that your recovery has started to worsen, and you see this based on things that are happening in real life, like you're failing to make it into your sessions and match previous performances, then and only then when that happens, you can decrease frequency and volume. A house costs $1 million and requires 10% down. You have $200,000 in cash. Do you have to take out a loan? Is this a trick question? Yes, of course you have to take out a loan. You're $800,000 short. The fact that you have $200K in cash means that you have enough for the down payment on the loan. It doesn't mean you don't need a loan. You need $1 million to not have to need a loan. Do overhead tricep extensions work the long head of the tricep more? Well, they stretch the long head of the tricep more, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the long head of the tricep is being worked harder or growing more from overhead movements, even though you will generally get a bigger pump with overhead movements in the long head because they are being stretched. So it just really depends on what your personal belief is regarding stretch-mediated hypertrophy and whether or not the triceps can experience that. But here's the thing about questions like this. They're a little silly because you can just go try an overhead tricep extension and see where you get a pump and where you feel it, right? You can actually just try the movement and see what it is working. I mean, if you go and you do a movement and it is causing disruption and pump in a muscle, and then somebody else tells you that doesn't actually work that muscle, sensation isn't everything, that person is full of shit and you are right. That's how it works. So easy debate ender there for anyone. Should conventional deadlifters train sumo? Is sumo a good assistance exercise for conventional deadlifts? Honestly, if you're not a powerlifter, I don't really think there's any point to the sumo deadlift. It's like a partial squat, basically. So you could always just do a regular squat or a regular wide stance squat and get a better training effect than what a sumo deadlift does. So, no, in my experience, sumo deadlifts do not carry over well to conventional deadlifts at all. However, the reverse isn't true. Conventional does carry over well. So the only reason to do sumo is to see if you're good at it for powerlifting. How important is it to know your volume landmarks as a lifter? Well, obviously I don't use the Renaissance periodization paradigm. However, in my opinion, knowing your quote-unquote volume landmarks is probably one of the single most important aspects of programming. Now, that doesn't mean like you can't figure it out as you go along when you're doing a program, but you need to know how much volume you need for progress, because if you don't do enough volume for progress, nothing happens. You don't set any PRs. And if you're doing way too much volume, you will actively regress due to failure to recover. So knowing how much volume you need and what the sweet spot is probably the single most important thing in programming. Is eating more calories earlier in the day advantageous compared to eating most of your calories at night? No, that does not matter at all beyond personal preference and adherence. If you're going to bias your calories towards any part of the day, you want to bias it to the window around your training. Is there any problem with getting a large amount of your carbohydrate intake each day from fruit? There is one small problem with that, and it has to do with the fact that fruit contains a very large amount of fructose. So I don't know how much you're eating overall, but there is a limit to how much fructose the liver can store per day. And after you go above that, the fructose pretty much goes directly towards fat. So it can give you worse body composition results if you're eating an absolutely enormous amount of fruit. Like I said, if you only eat 250 carbs a day, then getting a large amount of your carbs from fruit, you're still not eating that much fruit. But if you're eating 500 or 600 grams of carbs per day and most of that's from fruit, it's too much. What do you think of training 6 days per week? Personally, I think it's shit. I don't even like training 3 days in a row. But the reason why it does not work for me is because I train to failure and I use heavy compound exercises. If you're going to adopt the entire Renaissance periodization paradigm and philosophy, it can work, which means using the lightest weight possible on basically everything and purposely using techniques to make everything as light as possible and doing sub-maximal training on top of that. You cannot train 6 days a week going heavy and to failure. It doesn't work. Do you think powerlifting is ego lifting? Honestly, man, all lifting to some degree is ego lifting. Why do I say that? Because why do you need big, beautiful looking muscles if you're a bodybuilder or a physique athlete? Why do you need to be able to bench press or squat or deadlift way more than would ever be helpful or necessary in your job or daily tasks or just in how you function in life in general? Why would you need to do any of that? Because it makes you happy and you like it. There doesn't need to be a better reason than that, right? So if it makes you happy and you like it, then who really cares if somebody calls it ego lifting? The funniest thing in the world to me is, like, back in my day, ego lifting was like the 60-year-old dude that was at every single gym that would load up 20 plates on the leg press and move it 3 inches and accomplish fucking nothing. But nowadays, somebody will be deadlifting, like, I don't know, 625 pounds for a set of 4, and people will go, that's ego lifting. You need to do at least 5 reps for hypertrophy. You're not controlling the eccentrics. Like, that's all just for ego. Like, wait a minute, hold on. This goes back to what I was saying the other day. Just because you're doing something that isn't optimal doesn't mean that it provides 0 gains. Sometimes it provides the same amount of gains or even more gains. It's just that it provides a proportionally worse amount of fatigue. Okay? So, again, leave ego lifting when it's for the person that's accomplishing jack shit with their 3-inch range of motion leg press. Somebody that's actually working towards a goal that's making them happy, that's getting results, like they're generating progressive overload, they're building muscle over time. Don't call them an ego lifter. And it's like, well, it's not for pure hypertrophy. You're doing things that aren't optimal for pure hypertrophy. The vast majority of people who say that don't even have a 100% perfect nutrition plan. They aren't 100% perfect about sleep. So you're being a hypocrite. You're making an aesthetic preference and pretending that it is about what's truly optimal, when in reality, you just have an aesthetic preference for a certain type of training. If you have an aesthetic preference for using the lightest weight possible with the most perfect technique possible, I'm not going to hate on you, because you know what? It works and people get big and jacked that way. However, why don't we stop pretending that people don't get big and jacked and haven't been getting big and jacked from doing the basics without extreme form, without extreme tempo, without trying to use the lightest weights possible for years and years and years now. Personally, I think I've gotten pretty good results over the last 3 years with my quote-unquote ego lifting. I just like it, man. It makes me happy, okay? It's not like I'm getting 0 results. With that said, let's do the ads. If you guys like the Q&A, please remember to like the Q&A on YouTube when it comes out. If you'd like to become a more substantial supporter of the Q&A, you can do so on Patreon for $1 a month. If you'd like to work with me directly for coaching, shoot me a DM on Instagram for fastest reply. And for the links to my older ebooks, you can check my bio on Instagram or the description box on YouTube. I'll be back in another 48 hours to do it again. Peace.